We all ask questions. There are times in our lives when something happens and it just makes us ask the question, why? Why is the world like this? What does all this mean? But the trouble with life is that often we're so busy that we don't have time to really stop and think about those questions. That they rush into our minds, but then something else happens and the questions are gone. Well, this Globe Connect course is designed to be a place where we can stop, take a break, and just for a few minutes even, engage with some of those questions and think about them together. We can discuss and stretch our brains and interact with new ideas and perhaps even discover new realities. In this first session, we're going to think about the question, who is God? Then next time we'll think about who are we, what does it mean to be human? And then in our final session, we'll think about what is the point, what does all this mean? So who is God? Now, even as I ask that question, I'm making two assumptions. So let me be up front and tell you what those assumptions are. And then in the rest of our time together, we're going to try and think about whether those assumptions are valid or not. Firstly, I'm assuming that there is a God to be bothered about. Now, that may not be an assumption that you're ready to make yet. It may be that you're still questioning, thinking, you're not sure what you believe about whether there is a God or not. Well, we're going to explore that tonight. But there's a second assumption behind that question too. And that is that I phrased the question as, who is God? Not, what is God? And the second assumption is that God is personal. That God is not like a force or an energy, like electricity. So it would be very strange if I said to you, who is electricity? Who is this in my walls that runs in my walls and brings light to my room? You'd say, no, that's the wrong question. Not who, but what. What is electricity? And when it comes to God, we can often feel the same way, that there may be a God and it may be some kind of spiritual force out there somewhere. Well, I want to work on the basis that God is a someone, not a something. That the right question to ask is, who is God, not what is God? And we'll explore that as we go through. So two assumptions. There is a God, and God is personal. And in order to explore those two statements, I want us to think about clues and words. That's what we're going to need. Clues are going to help us to explore the existence of this God. Is there really anything out there? But then we're going to need words if we're really going to know what God is like. So let's start with clues. Many years ago, when I was a student, I studied chemistry. And I was taught chemistry by an amazing man called Professor Peter Atkins. He had an incredible brain, a huge intellect. And he was also absolutely convinced that there is no God. In fact, it's not just that he was convinced. He thought the notion that anyone would believe in God was completely ridiculous. He once said in a debate with another Christian, he said, the reason you believe in God is because your brain is starved of oxygen. So, picture me, little undergraduate, just arrived at university, sitting in his darkened study, and there's bookshelves from floor to ceiling, all lined with books, most of them written by him. And I find myself thinking, am I stupid? Is my belief in God irrational and foolish? And the problem I had as a scientist was that I couldn't put God in a laboratory and experiment on him. I couldn't measure him or test him. I couldn't collect data on him. In fact, I couldn't prove him scientifically at all. And that bothered me because I came to the conclusion that there was no scientific proof for the existence of God. But if that's the only way we think about proof, then we're making a big mistake. You see, there's another way that we talk about proof. not in a laboratory, but in a law court. So think about how proof works in a court of law. It's different to a laboratory where you run tests and you get data and you can make absolute statements on the basis of facts. There's something different going on in a court of law. What happens is that different clues are brought, different bits of evidence are put forward, and each one begins to build a case until you prove something beyond all reasonable doubt. But here's the key thing I want us to understand. Each of those clues on their own are not enough to make the case. No, it is the weight of evidence, it is the weight of all those clues built together that leads you to a confidence in what is true. And when it comes to the existence of God, we need to think more like a law court than a laboratory. We need to think of proof in that sort of way. I've been reading the Sherlock Holmes novels to my boys recently. And Sherlock Holmes is the master of clues. Here comes someone, they walk into his room, and he can imagine, just by looking at them, he can immediately tell what they had for breakfast and what sort of dog they own and what they did when they were 3. He sees the clues and he makes deductions. That's what I want to invite us to do this evening. To look at some clues and make some deductions. You see, I think as I look around the world, I see all sorts of clues that point to the reality of God. Let me just give you a few. I haven't got time to do loads, and there are loads, but let's just talk about 3 that I find particularly compelling and see what you think. Have a listen to these, chew them over, discuss them with other people. For a start, I want to say that the appearance of design in our world is a clue. The fact that as you look at our world, it looks like it's been designed is a clue to the existence of God. So I mean things like the fact that the earth is the perfect distance from the sun in order to be able to sustain life, or the beauty of a sunset, or the intricacies of a human eye. It's difficult to escape that sense. This is very well designed. Now, what if the reason our world appears to be designed is because it has been designed? Now, hear me very clearly. I am not saying that this clue is irrefutable evidence for the existence of God, but it's a clue. And it's not an irrational step to say that this world looks designed, perhaps it has been designed. That is not an irrational step. Okay, let's try another clue. What about morality? What about the sense that universally human beings care about what is right or wrong? Now, yes, in different places we may have different senses of right and wrong. We may disagree on exactly what is right and wrong, but we all care about that as a category, what is fair. Why do we care about the weak and the vulnerable and the needy? Could it be that the reason we care so much about right and wrong is because we're made by a God who cares about right and wrong? Could that be an echo of the image of God who made us? Now again, please hear me. I'm not saying that this is a clue that proves the existence of God, but I am saying it points that way. It would fit, it would make perfect sense that if there is a God who made us, that we would care about right and wrong. Or what about that sense that there's something wrong with our world, that our world is broken and spoiled? If I went out and spoke to people on the street and said, what's wrong with our world? I don't think many people would say there's nothing wrong with it. No, we all have a sense that there's something wrong. We all have a sense that it's spoiled and broken. But when you stop and think about it, that is slightly strange. Because for something to be broken and spoiled, it has to have had another intention. You see, if this world is just an accident that's come from nowhere, there's nothing wrong with it, it's just the way it is. But could it be that that profound sense we have of brokenness is because our world is broken? Could it be that our world was made for something better, for something more? We ache for that. Where does that come from? Again, it doesn't prove the existence of God, but perhaps it does give us an indication that there is more. There is something bigger going on in our world. Now, they're just 3 clues, and I could talk about more. And there's so many other things that would point us in that direction that fit with the idea of a God who made this world. So things like transcendence and awe and beauty and poetry and art and these things that we care about. All of them fit with the idea of a creator, a God who made us. So there are all sorts of clues that we could point at and look at. And it may be that you'll find yourself saying, well, maybe there is a God. I actually think that our culture has shifted away from that very hard atheism that I was talking about earlier. I don't think there are as many people today who are as ready to dismiss spirituality quite so strongly. I think there's much more of a sense of something bigger and beyond us. And whether we call that Mother Nature or some spiritual force or energy, we may not be ready to call it God, but we've got to sense there's something. But at this point, we hit a bit of a brick wall because we say, where do we go now? We've got some clues. They might prove the existence of God, but how do we even know? And even if there was a God, how could we ever know anything about him? We're just left guessing. Well, that's where we need to move now, from clues to words. You see, words, think about the nature of words. Words reveal things. Words show us things that we could never know for ourselves. And words are better than clues. So in the Sherlock Holmes stories, yes, Sherlock Holmes can deduce a load of stuff, but it is only when the character speaks that you actually really get to know the truth. So clues take us so far, but words take us much further. And in fact, words do even more than that. Words are an invitation to a relationship. If you walk past someone on the street and they say hello, that is an invitation to a relationship with them. It may be just a brief relationship as you pass by on the street, but it's an invitation. If I say to you, my name is John T., I am revealing something to you and inviting you to know me. And here is the central claim of the Bible. Here is the claim that lies at the heart of what Christianity is all about. God has spoken. This God that we've been talking about in terms of clues and maybe, not sure, he's spoken. And if God has spoken, then we don't have to guess anymore what he's like. When God speaks words, they invite us to know him. No longer just to see the clues and guess, but actually to know him. One of the first things you discover God doing in the Bible is speaking. When God made this world, there was darkness and there was emptiness, and then God said, "Let there be light." Why is it that God created by speaking? Well, it's because he's the great communicator. He speaks because he wants us to know him. Let me show you one sentence from the Bible where we can see a bit more of what I'm talking about. This is from a book in the Bible called Hebrews. It says this: "In the past, God has spoken to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son." Now, do you see it in that sentence? Twice we're told God has spoken. He's spoken in the past in all sorts of ways. Through human history, through world events, through prophets, particular people that God has sent to speak to this world. Oh yeah, he speaks because he wants us to know him. But he has spoken in the clearest and most obvious way in these last days by sending his Son. So this claim that God speaks is a claim that drives us to understand that God has spoken most clearly, not just by sending us words, but by sending us his own Son. Jesus is the central figure of Christianity and the central figure of the Bible, and it is Jesus who speaks the word of God so that we can know God. Jesus is the Son of God, come from God so that we can know God. And the life of Jesus is extraordinary. You read about his life in the Gospels and you discover his incredible miracles, his amazing teaching, which influences the world still today. And this Jesus is the Son of God who came so that we could know God. Now, I realize that we've covered a lot of ground, and I realize you've probably got loads and loads of questions, and I'm saying big things. But here's the central claim. God has spoken. He is so willing to know us that he would even send his Son so that we could know him. And God's words invite us into a relationship with him. Now, of course, if God has spoken, we must listen. If God really has spoken, then we must know him. To refuse and to ignore God's words that he has spoken would be a terrible and dreadful mistake to make. So this really does matter. If God has spoken, we must listen. If God hasn't spoken, if there is no God, or if it is just a forcey thing, then we can ignore him. But if he's spoken, we must listen. So that's what I want to encourage you to do. Why not find a Bible and read for yourself an account of Jesus' life? Perhaps start with Mark's Gospel. Listen and discover what God is really like. And perhaps even come to know him for yourself. Well, we're going to leave it there, and I want you to think about these things and chat about them and discuss them and push back at them. It's okay to disagree and to argue and to think, because these things really matter. So God has spoken. We see the clues all around us, and we need to listen to the words that he's spoken.